The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into episode 8 of season 4 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week's guest is Dr. David Glover. David is Associate Professor of Percussion at Slippery Rock University, which is just north of Pittsburgh here. And at Slippery Rock, he teaches applied percussion, percussion ensemble, jazz band, percussion methods, music history, world percussion. There's a new pop music program that they're developing. He has multiple degrees, a bachelor's from the University of North Florida, a master's degree from Florida State, and a doctorate from the University of Texas in Austin. He's an incredible drummer, incredible percussionist. He's a former president of the Pennsylvania chapter of the Percussive Arts Society. Very curious about all areas of percussion. So in this episode, we wanted to focus on 10 areas of percussion that aren't necessarily drum set, but can be very influential and very important for us as drum set players to be aware of. So different regions of the world, just different styles. So this is a deep dive, so let's get to it. 10 different areas of percussion with Dr. David Glover.
Well, now we got to dive in. So you prepared 10 areas of percussion that you think all drummers should explore, because I think I originally asked you for this to be, since I know most of our listeners are drum set players.
Right.
And then why they should check out non-drum set percussion playing.
Absolutely.
So let's just dive into your list. Number 1 on your list is, not surprising, West African. Are these in any particular order or just random?
I started just stream of consciousness writing out, a bunch of different things that I thought were important or cool to check out or just interesting to me. Hopefully they're interesting to everybody else, but obviously I'm not going to hit with every one of these. But I started and then rearranged them very quickly, realizing that, if I'm going to talk about this, then I should probably talk about this before. Mm-hmm. And you can't go wrong with starting with West African music. I think almost everything in the music world is touched by West African music to some extent. These days, with the popularity of American pop music and jazz music and the lineage of all those styles of music that came in between, all that started with West African roots. So I think it's always a good idea to get as much West African music specifically as you can on a roots level. Just to hear where that stuff is coming from, and you'll immediately be able to pick up on how that stuff relates to whatever it is you're doing, whether you're playing timpani in a classical setting, or whether you're playing drum set, or whether you're playing tambourine, or whether you're playing who knows what else, congas. It all comes from Africa, and then specifically, most of the stuff we're listening to comes from West Africa specifically, unfortunately due to the slave trade. But that's the unfortunate side of all of this, and the ugly, dirty history that we deal with as Americans all the time. But it's one of the beautiful things that came out of that really dark, ugly period in our history, is this connection to West African music. So there's all kinds of aspects of it that you could be listening for, like polyrhythm and improvisation and call and response. It's all there, and it's all intertwined in our music to this day. If you've never heard Baba Olatunji or Bernard Woma, these types of folks, do yourself a favor and check that stuff out. There's so much wisdom in their playing. These rhythms that they're playing are so deep, and they're so old, they're so ancient, and they're just masterful players. It's just beautiful to listen to. So I would just encourage anybody to go out and check that out. If you're a drum set player, obviously checking out somebody like Art Blakey to get that connection. If you're in the jazz world, Will Calhoun is another one of my drum heroes. Spent a lot of time in West Africa and has adapted West African rhythms and techniques to his drum set playing. Will Kennedy is another one. You guys have talked about Art and Will already with some of my Pittsburgh heroes. Locally, there's a guy named Jim Donovan. Do you know Jim Donovan at all?
I don't. I gotta look him up.
He started with a band called Rusted Root,
Okay.
which is a fairly local band. And he runs another band he started on his own later after that group broke up. But he is an amazing djembe player and does a lot of drum circle kinds of things, but amazing musician in general. But Jim Donovan is a local guy that you should check out if you're in the Pittsburgh region. He's an excellent hand drummer in that way. And there's bunches of others. So that's probably something I should mention, is that I give you a couple caveats, and that my apologies if any of these pronunciations are wrong. If I leave people out, I'm sure I'm leaving people out. And just generally for my ignorance, there's not a lot I know about anything, but most of these things I know like fractions. I'm doing the best I can.
Appreciate it.
So those are a couple of my caveats. So, but anyway, yes, West African traditions for sure.
And then number 2 is also not surprising, would be Brazilian.
Absolutely, another style of music that has a lot of West African roots is Brazilian drumming, samba, bossa nova, baião, and the dozens and dozens of other different Brazilian styles that come from all over the nation of Brazil. But percussion instruments of Brazil are beginning to be more and more common. As a percussionist, I don't say you need to know these things, but it's getting to the point where you kind of need to know. You need to have a little basic pandeiro technique. You need to know how caixa is played and the kinds of rhythms that caixas play, or surdo, and how important that is to the rhythm of samba in particular. But all those instruments of the escola de sambas, I think they're not going to hurt, certainly, to get under your hands, but that music is so involved and so deep as well. But all these instruments, all the little techniques used to play them, can help you do myriad things on the drum set. Watching great Brazilian drummers play on YouTube, drum set players, you'll notice when they're playing swingy rhythms, they might be using a technique used specifically for the tamborim, a little instrument. It sounds like tambourine, but it's got no jingles on it, et cetera, et cetera. There's this wild technique you have to use to play tamborim. They use that playing the ride cymbal to try to get dig it, get all those 16th notes to happen at those pretty bright tempos in Escola de Samba. So knowing those instruments, knowing those rhythms is pretty important. But if you've never heard a batucada play during Carnival season, again, do yourself a favor and check that out. There would be literally hundreds of people playing percussion instruments, 99% of which are not professional drummers. They're just plumbers and electricians and whatever else, housewives. They'll pick up a cuica and just go to town on this cuica, and they don't really know what they're playing rhythmically necessarily, but they're excellent at what they do. And you put a whole bunch of people together doing these rhythms at the same time. It's magical. That groove that is created inside of Brazilian music is on a whole other level than I think what we approach in this country, trying to imitate those musics. So the deeper you can get into that stuff, the deeper you can get into those grooves and figure out what makes them tick, or get with somebody in your local area to kind of help you navigate this music and where to start. I think that's huge. But so drum set, you had Tom interviewing the great Duca da Fonseca. He is an excellent one to start with. Airto, another great drum set player, percussionist from Brazil. Minu Sineu is another one. All these guys are fantastic drum set and percussionists in the Brazilian tradition. So check those folks out. Around Pittsburgh, if you're fortunate enough to see like Sol Samba play, you can get to hear Tom Wendt play some of that Brazilian music. It's fantastic. Do yourself a favor and check that out. Another guy that we're friends with, I think you know Adam Osmansky, right?
Yep.
Lives in London now. That dude has gone deep into the Brazilian world. And yeah, does some blogging and podcasts and that sort of thing as well. So look up that guy. Adam Osmansky is another great one that I've had a few chances to get together and talk Brazilian music with, and he's just a wealth of knowledge on that stuff.
So before we go into the next one, touch on the topic of like how deep to go, because these cultures are centuries. There's so much tradition, and you can like. When I was in college, it was kind of a rabbit hole. Like I didn't want to quote unquote appropriate anything. I wanted to get it as deep as I could, but then it was like I could spend 20 years trying to play a samba and never get it even close to what it really should sound like. So
absolutely, and I completely agree. And I go round and round with that thought myself all the time. Like, am I really doing this justice, or am I appropriating? I like to think that I have my best intentions are that I'm trying to get enough of this knowledge together for myself that I can make a decent representation of it when I'm playing that music, because I have to play that music a lot. Mm-hmm. So why not play it as authentically and as well as I possibly can? And I'm constantly working on that stuff. And the more I learn about playing this percussion instrument with my hands, that definitely directly transfers to what I'm doing on the drum set. And the more I pick up of that stuff, or the more Brazilian concerts I see, or clinics from Brazilian musicians or West African musicians or whoever, it all directly transfers to the drum set and just enhances that knowledge. But to answer your question, I think it's really up to the individual. For me, I felt like I needed to get deeper into these things because I wanted to teach it to my students. Mm. I wanted to have a batucada up at Slippy Rock and have these folks that have never heard Brazilian music ever in any way, shape, or form be able to play this music and get exposure to it, not just from a listening level, but actually being involved in it. I think that's one of the big things that I try to give to my students is just exposure to it, but from the inside. It's one thing to listen to the music and to read the notated rhythms. It's a whole other thing to pick up that instrument and try to get that rhythm to be played properly on the instrument. Even if you only pick up one instrument inside of that batucada, it's going to change the way you think about rhythm and about music and about that style. That's what's important to me. That's what I'm trying to get across to my students as best I can in the limited capacity that I'm able to, actually.
Which leads right into the next one, which is why I wanted to ask that question now, because when I started digging into Afro-Cuban percussion, it was, especially because I was friends with Cuban percussionists in Philly, and like the way they've played, it was like, I don't even know what language you're speaking. I can't even understand what's happening. And it was frustrating. It was frankly frustrating. It was beautiful and super inspiring, but it was like, I'm not even going to go there anymore.
Absolutely.
I can't do it. So what's Afro-Cuban bringing to the table for you?
Well, I have of all of these, well, maybe not all of these styles, or all these categories that we're going to be talking about. Afro-Cuban music has been something that has been around with me probably longer than most of these other aspects, in that playing in school bands, you might come across a Latin tune, or you're learning those grooves from a pretty early age. When I first went to my very first jazz camp as a senior in high school, the drummer out there, Ronnie Bedford was his name, great jazz drummer, wrote out a list of just some basic styles. And that was my real first exposure to seeing the written notation of how a samba was written, or how cha-cha-cha was written, or how a mambo was supposed to be written. And we talked a lot about that and listened to some of that music and showed me how to play a little bit of it and got started. So I've been dealing with this for a long time. I also was a huge Santana fan of all things when I was a kid, and that helped a lot. There's so much of that language that is in that music too, and it's equally valid as the other stuff. It's just put in a different context is all. So that helped a lot. When I got to Florida State, there was a Latin jazz group there that needed a new drummer, and I stepped into that role and had to learn all that stuff very quickly, and that was a lot of fun. The conga player was a really good educator as well, and helped me out a lot. Taught me some basic conga patterns. Even though I was playing drum set in that group, it started that process of understanding. Okay, the conga player does this. This is their role inside of it. This is what they're typically going to do. If they're going to improvise, they're going to do it this way. If they're going to play in clave, they're going to do it this way. That kind of stuff. Or when we change grooves, I'm going to change my pattern on the congas. Learning his role in the group was extremely important to me, and how not to step on his rhythms and vice versa. So those kind of things helped out. Reading more and more jazz ensemble charts and playing with different jazz groups and listening to more stuff helped. Then I got to Pittsburgh, and fairly quickly I was asked by some friends to play timbales in a salsa band. That band's called a Zukar. We've been around in some form or another for close to 25 years now. And it's had some great percussionists in that group. The great George Jones has played congas in that group forever. There's a great, now is timpanist for the Houston Symphony. Leo Soto was the long-standing timbalero for that group. And it's mostly original material, but I had never really played timbales before in a salsa band. But again, I was given this opportunity. I was like, well, now's the time. I know this much about it. Let's see how much I can expand my knowledge of it, and really dug in. I got a lot of help from George, got a lot of help from Leo, got a lot of help from other percussionists and musicians that came in and out of that group. So yeah, my exposure to Afro-Cuban music has been much deeper than most groups, but yes, it is like speaking another language. Mm-hmm. George used to say to me, George Jones, a conga player in that group, used to say to me all the time, like, George, help me out, man. Like, what am I doing wrong? How can I make this stuff better? He's like, man, you just need to listen more. Just keep listening. Like, yeah, all right. I'll keep listening. I was listening already, but I'll keep listening. That was his way of telling me, you're not there yet. You just keep listening. And that's yet another thing I'm trying to pass along here, is just listening to this stuff is the first step. If you want to get deeper into it, there's always ways to get deeper into it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, Rebecca Morion Santana's, Carlos Santana's wife from a while back, wrote this great book called The Salsa Guidebook. No. It is an amazing book that goes through every aspect of salsa music. Covers all the parts, all the history of the music, writes out sample charts in the back, all the different rhythms that each of those instruments play, from the piano parts to the bass tumbao to the conga parts to the timbales to the maracas to clave. and again, lists of all the great players in that style of music. Yeah, it's amazing, amazing text, and I got a lot out of that book. There's other drum set books that I got a lot out of, and so yes, but yeah, but checking out clinics and seeing guys like Giovanni Hidalgo play multiple times, like that all helps. It helped a lot with me. But yes, it is another language for sure, and just like any other language, it's best if you can approach it from the inside out. If you can go and live in that country and stay with a host family that's bilingual, that's always the best way to learn a language, other than just like studying a textbook or online tutorial or whatever. If you're in it, you're more than likely going to retain some of that stuff, and you're going to get insight into it. And that, for me, was, again, another one of these opportunities that came about several times in my life and my career that have helped me get a little bit more, just deeper inside of these musics. Again, approaching from the inside out. So I would highly recommend that everybody try to get with these local folks that know these musics and get a lesson with them, talk with them, listen to some music with them. That's a great way to check it out. Like, who are you listening to? Who are your heroes? Listen to those records with them, and you'll see them light up, and they just want to talk about and play and all that kind of stuff. I've done a lot of lessons over the years with various people. I would love to do more, and I'm going to very, very soon. So yes.
That's a great point, because some of my best drum set lessons were when he would play his favorite records and his favorite drummers. And it was like, why do you like Blakey so much more than, because at the time I was like a Bill Stewart obsessed.
Sure.
And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's throw on this Blakey record.
Yeah.
And it really set like a tone of like, oh, there's some depth here that I'm not quite getting yet. I've got to dig in further.
And every one of these things it's the same way. They've reached this level, and it's not that I'm not trying to be Horacio Hernandez. I respect that and I love that, but that's not my thing, and nobody wants to hear me do that. But you can get stuff from that. You can get a lot of things from that. Mm-hmm. That relationship and seeing them play and talk about what's important to them, what do they value in that music, and what are they thinking about when they're playing it, in their histories, like in their histories, like the people that they were taking from and who they were checking out. Like, man, it's so deep, and all this stuff is so beautiful. It's just these folks are a lot more accessible than I think people think they are. They would love nothing more than to share this stuff about their music. That's what I found in the world of percussion in general. Most of us are still open-minded, really cool people, that just want to help you get to that next level in your own playing, or just share their music with you. And I've been fortunate enough to come across these folks many, many times over the years. So some of my heroes in this, before I forget, Horacio El Negro Hernandez, great player, was one of the first to really bring that left foot clave thing into the drum set world. Got exposure to him when I was in undergrad. He had just defected from Cuba and came over to the United States with Paquito de Rivera on a tour. And he spent about a week at North Florida. He didn't speak a word of English, and it was just us drummers standing around Horacio while he's playing all this stuff. We're like, how are you? What is this? Nice. Good. like our minds were collectively blown, and for the next month and a half, we're all sitting around trying to work on our left foot clave. But yeah, so fantastic, and he's another one of those guys. He loves to talk about music, and he would love nothing more than to just share his history and his life, and play rhythms with you. You know, Mark Walker is another one, and probably one of the more unsung heroes of the drumming world, in my opinion. He's the guy I want to be when I grow up. He's taken all this stuff, so many different styles of music from around the world, and learned how to play it, and play it really, really well. Mark Walker is definitely one of those guys you want to check out. So Ignacio Baroa, Bobby Sanabria. Around locally, obviously Hugo Cruz, directly from Cuba. If you've never checked out Hugo Cruz, holy cow, this guy's he's just a virtuoso on all the percussion instruments. Classically trained as well in the Russian Conservatory in Havana. Yeah, definitely a good dude to check out. George Jones, Noel Quintana, great Puerto Rican conguero, who I've studied with. Yeah, he's amazing as well if you're in the local Pittsburgh area. But man, every city's got these folks around, so check them out.
So now we move to the biggie, European Western orchestral percussion. Convince me, a drum set player, why I need to learn how to play glockenspiel.
Well, I can't convince anybody on why you need to play the glockenspiel, but I can convince you that you need to check out this music, because it's extremely deep, and there's so much to be had from this. I just got done watching the Pittsburgh Symphony, which is an amazing world-class orchestra. Their percussion section is just the best. They just got done playing Stravinsky's Rite of Spring this past weekend. My wife and I went up on Friday night and heard them. Holy cow. Like, if you're a drum set player and you can't get something out of watching those percussionists play that music, you should. Yeah, seeing somebody like Andy Reamer, who is the principal percussionist for the Pittsburgh Symphony, very first piece they played, he's got a triangle part, which is funny to see Andy playing a triangle, because man's like 6'7", huge dude. He's got the tiny little able triangle, and he played 3 notes in a row, just little crescendo on that triangle. Just the touch he uses on that triangle, I just got a smile on my face. Like, that's it. Now, granted, that's not the sexiest thing as a drum set player to watch somebody do, but when you get to be my age and you've seen people do these kinds of things as much as I have, you really respect the touch that orchestral percussionists have that most drum set players don't get close to. There is a dynamic contrast in things you can do with your fingers inside of your grip that can affect the sound of every instrument you play on the drum set. So much so. So it can't be overstated how important that kind of finesse is. Especially most of the gigs I play these days, I have to play quietly. And people don't want you to just play quiet and boring. They want you to play intensely, but quietly. And that skill is something that needs to be developed. And I've found the best way to develop that for me and a lot of my students has been exposure to the classical repertoire, learning how to play the concert snare drum really well. That does wonders for your technique. Rudimental snare drum as well, obviously, but learning how to play a marimba, learning how to play mallet instruments, that it all goes hand in hand into developing your ears, developing your touch, developing your sensitivity. And also just knowing how to phrase, that's a huge one that we don't, it's a mystical word and a very curious word that people talk about, like play more musically, like phrase that better. Like, what does that mean? A lot of drum set players, if you're not exposed to this world, it can sound like a different language, like, okay, great. How do we do that? Percussion training, classical European percussion training, will access that for you. It'll expose you to those kinds of things and allow you to build that up in your technique. So that's my main thing about classical percussion, is that how much it can do for your ability to read music, ability to hear music differently, ability to phrase and play more musically, but also finesse, touch, dynamic control, all that stuff is hugely important for the drum set. And you can get that from a good classical training. And fortunately for us, there's tons of these folks that teach. You can go get a lesson with them. And again, every city around the world has these folks. And they would be happy to help you get from point A to point B with your playing. Even if you're just a drum set player, you can go get some of the stuff from them. And I think that's important to do. Not to mention it's some of the most beautiful music ever, Charlie Parker's favorite piece is Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. There's something to be said about that. All the tunes he could have picked in the 1940s and 50s, he enjoyed Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. If it's good enough for Charlie Parker, it's good enough for me, and there's just so much other beautiful stuff out there that doesn't even have percussion on it. So that world is, don't deprive yourself of that world just because you don't think it doesn't directly transfer to what you're doing. It does. You just have to go to that music. Just like jazz music, it's been said, that music is not going to come to you. You've got to go to it. It takes a kind of a leap of faith to go that route, but it's definitely worth it. Definitely. So again, locally, shout out to all the Pittsburgh Symphony musicians, Andy Reamer, Chris Allen, Jeremy Branson, Sean Galvin. Their new timpanist is James Benoit. John Soroka, Ed Steffen, Tim Adams, Tom Freer. All these guys are local to this region. They're all amazing players. Tim Adams doesn't live here anymore, and Ed Steffen moved to San Francisco. But these folks they're just the best. And I've heard most of these folks, well, maybe not most of these folks, I've heard people like Andy Reamer and Ed Steffen play drum set, Tom Freer play drum set, Tim Adams play drum set. They are great drum set players too, in addition to all that stuff. Go hear Andy Reamer play some jazz vibraphone, folks. Will blow your mind. That dude is next level all the way around. And makes great snare drum sticks, makes great rope drums, all that stuff right here in Pittsburgh, right here in River City.
So what is your go-to concert snare drum text these days?
Most of the time, I use a bunch of different ones. Most of the time around here, the Mitchell Peters books are kind of baked into the PMEA literature. So when a student is preparing for district honor band or region band or all state, they're usually having to read Mitchell Peters pieces. For better or worse, I love those books. They're not my favorite books for drum set, but they're good books. There's a lot of hard music in there. Since they have to learn that, I use those books primarily just because that's what they're already used to it. They're already used to his style of writing, the way the book looks, how it's presented, all that kind of stuff. So I use those books a lot. Usually start with the intermediate book and go to the advanced But there's odd time solos and all that stuff in there. There's a bunch of great Mitchell Peters books. The Cerrone I've used a bunch. I was taught with the Morris Goldenberg, the orange
same, yeah.
Snare drum book. I used the blue Goldenberg marimba book or mallet book. Still do, much to my students' dismay. But also Delacluse. I am a huge fan of Jacques Delacluse's books. Not just Deux Etudes, but the Kaiskerianas, the Initium series, his Test Claire is great. I love Jacques Delacluse's stuff, and it's great for a lot of things, finger related, and grip related, stroke related, dynamic related, especially. Yeah, those are my go-tos.
All right, what's next? Oh, marimba and basically keyboard soloing. Is that what the?
Yeah. So this goes back to my very first PASIC we were talking about in 1993. I think the very first evening concert was Keiko Abe playing a solo recital. I had never really heard a solo marimbist before that time, and yeah, she blew me away. One of the major reasons she blew me away as much as she did, in addition to her great music, was, first of all, she's like 5'2". She's tiny, tiny Japanese woman. And she's playing on an instrument that it like comes up to her chest almost. And she is bouncing all over the place and sliding all over the marimba, playing with 4 mallets, playing with 6 mallets, playing with 2 mallets, doesn't matter. And getting the biggest, fattest sound and the most energy I've ever seen out of a performance in general, much less a concert percussionist. That kind of passion when you're playing is, it hit me. It changed my life, literally that day. Watching her play, it was amazing. I had a friend, one of those friends that drove up with us in the Bronco 2 that day, who was on the PASIC logistics team, and hauled her marimba off the stage after that concert. And he said she broke 3 marimba bars.
Oh my!
Which I completely believe it, because she hits the marimba like nobody else. And just a beautiful person. She's the kindest person. But anyway, she started me on this path of 4 mallet marimba playing. I fell in love with that instrument, so much so that my wife and I bought one of our own. But it all started, with Keiko Abe. Obviously, Evelyn Glennie, who I've gotten a chance to see a couple of times over the years and seen her do clinics. She is amazing. Can't say enough good things about her and the way she plays. But the main reason I bring this up, like why should anybody get into 4 mallet playing if you're a drum set player primarily? It's because of the way they play the instrument, the way they move around the instrument. The very physical nature of playing marimba in a 4 mallet way, I think can be very eye-opening and illuminating for a drum set player. To see again how touch is really important on the instrument, but also just the way you shape a phrase visually. It's not something we talk about a lot, but the difference in if you play a note like this versus playing a note like that difference doesn't make a lot of sense in the or difference in terms of sound. It still sounds like a hand clapping, but this one sounds longer somehow. Right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's a huge part of being a marimbist, especially if you're somebody like Keiko Abe, to get out these mostly staccato tones that we get out of these instruments. The marimba is an exception. It's a resonant instrument for sure, but it makes a difference. And I think visually, We lose sight of that sometimes with our sound. And that's another thing, yet another thing I think we can get from the concert arena. One of my favorite musicians to watch is Ed Steffen. I mentioned him in the last segment. Ed is an extremely visual timpani player. He's the principal timpanist for the San Francisco Symphony. He was with the Pittsburgh Symphony before that, and several other symphonies before that. He's a badass. But anyway, he will do that same thing where he wants to get a long note out. He makes it look long. I love that aspect of it, and I use that aspect of it a lot in my drum set playing. It seems a little showy, maybe, to some people, or why are you doing this extra motion? But I don't use it all the time in my drum set playing, but I definitely use it a lot in my concert playing, and I teach it to my students. It's a big thing I try to get across to them as well. But that's definitely something that has come up through just the watching of marimba and teaching marimba all these years. That's definitely something I've noticed, and it's helped me a lot as a drum set player for sure.
Side note, did you happen to catch Josh Freese's debut with the Foo Fighters that streamed yesterday?
I saw that it was there, and I did not watch it, but I'm so excited because I'm a huge fan of the Foo Fighters. I love Taylor Hawkins. I'm a huge Dave Grohl fan. And Josh Freese, man, I love that dude. He's so great. Did you watch it?
I think you've got a day and a half left to stream it before they yank it down. So
yeah, I will definitely do it. I will definitely.
The reason I mentioned it is because exactly the experience you had with Keiko Abe, I had with Josh Freese playing with the Foo Fighters yesterday.
Really?
Like, holy cow, this is giving me chills because he was playing like a giddy teenager. So much energy and just going for it. At the end of the tunes, he wasn't too cool to be like, yeah, that was badass. And you can feel it in the band. They're like, holy cow, we're back to life.
Absolutely.
Like this is insane.
There's something to be said about the way you play music physically. What your face is doing, what your hands are doing, what your feet are doing, the choreography of doing all this stuff, and it adds an energy that's intangible. You don't get that from everybody. You know? And I thought as soon as I heard his name, I was like, yeah, he's the right one. I had heard that they were considering Matt Cameron for a period of time. Now the drummer with Pearl Jam and has been for years in Soundgarden. I was a huge fan of Matt Cameron, still am, like one of my favorite drummers. But the more I thought about that, it's like Matt Cameron, as much as I love him, he's not the right fit for that band. You know what I mean? He doesn't have that Taylor Hawkins, Josh Freese kind of energy. This bubbly, and he's smiling a lot. You know? I don't know if I've ever seen Matt smile. To be honest. So for them, it probably wasn't the best fit. I'm so happy for them. That's fantastic. I can't wait to.
Yeah, unfortunately, this will air after they've yanked it down, but maybe it'll be available sometime soon. But I'm like, I want to buy tickets to these shows. It's like, man, they were ripping. You can see Pat Smear was just so happy to be playing faster than the record. You know, it was like they were just having so much fun.
Absolutely. I love that, and I love that about the Foo Fighters. They just seem to have that much fun all the time. I love watching that. The chemistry of that group has just been great. I've seen them a bunch of times live too.
I've never seen them.
Always fantastic.
Yeah. All right, the next one you've got. This is another deep one that I dabbled in for a year in college and then realized no way. Indian classical.
You and me both.
North and South India.
Yes. So, depending on how much you know about Indian music, it's divided up into two different styles, basically, North and South Indian. North Indian is Hindustani, and South is Carnatic, they call it. we know the North Indian style probably much more than the South Indian style in the United States, just because of the popularity of a guy named Ravi Shankar, a great sitar player, and his longtime partner and collaborator on tabla was Ustad Alaraka Khan, otherwise known as Alaraka. Alaraka is also the father of Zakir Hussain, who's inarguably the best tabla player on planet Earth right now. And there's a bunch of history there, but we're used to that style. We've heard that style. And I think almost every American can recognize what a sitar sounds like and what a tabla sounds like, or what tabla sound like. But yeah, as far as, as far as South Indian drumming, though, they're close. They're related to each other, but the instruments aren't quite as well known. Instruments like Mridangam, which is basically like a two-headed tabla, barrel-shaped drum, and they play it this way in their laps. There's a tambourine called a kanjira that has one set of jingles on the bottom of it. It's got a monitor lizard skin on it, and it can be tuned much the same way that you can depress tabla by playing with your fingers and pressing in with the butt of your hand. You can change the pitch of the larger of the two tabla drums. So anyway, there's two deep and very, very rich centuries-old traditions in both North and South Indian drumming. The things we can get from this are many-fold, but I would encourage everybody, even though you're probably not going to run out and buy a set of tabla and try to get some tabla lessons with somebody or learn how to play Mridangam or Kanjira or whatever. You can go online and find out all kinds of information about the system of bowls or rhythmic syllables that they use inside of Indian drumming in Indian music, and start to learn those, because Indian music is filled with odd groupings of stuff. And we in Western music we're not all that exposed or all that, we just don't have a lot of experience with odd groupings of stuff. I probably never played a quintuplet until I was midway through college, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just a different way of approaching counting of rhythm and time signatures and that kind of thing. Plus polyrhythm is such a huge part of that music, both North and South Indian stuff. The bowls or syllables they use are different in the North and the South, but they still address the same areas of rhythm. And I think it's really beneficial to get involved in that as much as you can, if for no other reason than just to maneuver odd time signatures and odd groupings a little bit more easily as a Western percussionist or drum set player, for sure. And there's scads of great percussionists and drum set players that have taken these rhythms to heart, and not necessarily learned how to play tabla or learned how to play any of these instruments specifically, but they learn the counting systems and they learn how ragas are shaped, for example, and how the forms of these tunes come together. Steve Smith is one of the obvious ones, who has toured with Zakir Hussain and his groups many times over. Got to hear him play with that group a number of years back in Central PA. Dan Weiss is another one that I know you guys have talked about a couple times on your podcast. But Trilok Gurtu is another amazing musician. I haven't heard a lot from Trilok. If anybody knows where Trilok is or what Trilok is doing these days, I would love to know, because that guy, he was like on everything in the late 90s and then just kind of disappeared. And he was amazing drummer. If you've never seen Trilok play, he sits on the floor and plays a drum set that's been modified to sit on the ground. He has a set of tabla in front of him as well. But amazing musician, and kind of took all these Indian classical music ideas rhythmically and has approached it on the drum set that way. Locally, there's a guy also in Rusted Root that lives up here in Zelienople Harmony area. Is a guy named Jim DeSpirito. Jim DeSpirito was a percussionist in Rusted Root for a long time and went to India and studied tabla with a guru over there for a couple of years, I believe. I could be wrong that way, but as far as the amount of time, but he's a great resource locally in this region. If you reach out to Jim, he can get you into that kind of thing. So yes, lots of beautiful music in that area.
That's a good question about Treelock. I know we sell a ton of his signature sticks still, so.
He's still out there. I think I saw like a quick clip of him playing with somebody recently. I'd say recently, it's probably been 3 years ago now, but yeah, then I was just like, wow, I haven't heard from him in literally like 20 years. Like, where's he been? What has he been doing? I hope he's okay.
We'll find out.
Treelock, if you're out there, keep putting out some stuff.
Hit me up at drumcandypodcast@gmail.com.
Exactly.
So this next category, I'm not even sure what you mean. Hand and finger drumming.
Yeah. So this is why I put this one after the Indian drumming, because there's a lot of elements of Indian classical music technique with using your fingers, hands and fingers, on frame drums primarily, but it's also the same techniques that can be used on things like darbukas and doumbeks, udu drums, all that kind of stuff. There's a few main people that and again, I'm going to miss some people, but there's a couple folks that have been doing this for a long, long period of time, and good people to check out if you want to see how they've adapted these kinds of things to frame drums and finger drumming techniques, tambourines of all different types. But Glenn Velez is one of the first guys to start this. Glenn Velez came to University of North Florida when I was there and gave a clinic on finger drumming and hand drumming, and taught us some of the Indian counting syllables, how to count that music. When it taught us a few different compositions and some basic finger drumming techniques. Those have been really, really helpful to me. Glenn was a drum set player as well, started on the drum set before coming to the hand drumming world. One of his proteges was a woman by the name of Lane Redman, also in the PAS Hall of Fame. All these folks are in the PAS Hall of Fame. She kind of took what he did and expanded upon it and did her own thing with it. John Bergamo, John Bergamo, is another one that was doing the same things. These are around the 90s, early 80s, in through the 90s and early part of the 2000s when this was really happening. A local drummer to check out if you're in the Cleveland area ever is a guy named Jamie Haddad, who was the percussionist with Paul Simon, and still is to this day. Amazing percussionist and drummer, but does a lot of these finger drumming techniques, but incorporated into his drum set. So definitely somebody to check out that way. But the way they've combined, the thing I love about this style of percussion is that you can use it to play on literally anything. There's videos of Glenn Velez and John Bergamo playing on like nipple gongs and doing this stuff, or playing on tambourines, or playing on drum set, or playing on a concert bass drum, or whatever. It doesn't matter. You can play on literally everything with your fingers. But there's been people like John Bonham was playing with his hands on drums, right? Like, we've all seen this happen, but there's a whole other level to this that you can achieve. And it's not it's not quite as difficult as you think, especially if you've been working on things like finger control exercises, going through each of your fingers. Like, you have that digital dexterity as the drum set player already. This is just a cool, different way of getting sounds on instruments that I really enjoy. And it's also a combination of so many different things, which I really like as well. So check that out.
Yeah, I saw Glenn at a PASIC. That might have been 94 or something like that. And it was a mind-blowing experience. He had a big frame drum, and he was like doing a lot of snapping and stuff on it. It's like, okay, I don't know what's happening here.
And doing overtone singing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he taught us all how to overtone sing. Like, again, do you use this every day? Nah, not really. But to a whole segment of people in the percussion world and in the music world, like, that stuff is the stuff. It's that's the stuff they geek out over just as much as we geek out over Art Blakey's shuffle, you know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, these are the real folks, man. Check these people out. They're amazing. Mark Walker is another one. He's learned a lot of these finger drumming techniques.
Oh yeah, man, I gotta.
He plays a mean darbuka, man.
Okay,
that dude out.
The next category is, I kind of categorize it as more of like a dance, Japanese taiko or choreography.
Yeah, there's a huge element of choreography inside of this music. They definitely put on shows with each piece they play. Each composition has a very particular way you have to move while you play. This was a direct transfer to me from Keiko Abe. Seeing Keiko Abe play the marimba, and then seeing Kodo play taiko. Kodo is the most famous Japanese festival drumming taiko group in Japan, but they've toured the world many times over. Seeing them play and seeing her play, it just lined up for me. Like, it's all very Japanese. They have a lot of the Japanese have a lot of rules about the way they play and the way they interpret music. And rules it's the wrong way to characterize it, but for lack of a better word. But it's extremely it's a very much a fine art, but at the same time, there's a lot of improvisation in it. And I love that about it. And Kodo it's so physical. That's the thing I've noticed about, we've had a taiko ensemble up at Slippery Rock for the past 7 or 8 years or so. I went and studied some taiko drumming with a guy in Hawaii by the name of Kenny Endo, who's another drum set player, started in the drum set world and wanted to be a jazz and rock drummer, and then got into taiko and came at it from that angle. So he was very helpful to me trying to connect those two worlds. He'd already done that for us, you know, and there's a bunch of people out there like that. But it's an extremely physical art. You start sweating immediately. There's a whole warm-up process you got to go through before you start playing. The drummers of Kodo, for example, they live on an island. They have their own island in Japan. That they have a huge studio, and they have living quarters and a kitchen. They grow all their own food. With a handful of exceptions, and I think there's a 6-mile round trip on this mountain that they live on. There's a 6-mile round trip route that they run every single day. Rain, sleet, snow, doesn't matter. They all get up and run 6 miles up and down this mountain. They are in peak physical condition. And to see these people play, it's on a, like I said, it's like on a spiritual level. It transcends music for these folks, for sure. When they're in it, they are in it, and you can take all kinds of stuff from that just watching them play. Not necessarily, again, taking the rhythms necessarily, but and transferring that to drum set or, taiko techniques or whatever, but it does transfer over. There are a lot of the taiko techniques that, like holding the bachi, you can hold them the exact same way you hold drumsticks, or hanger timpani grip they use that for the larger bachi. So anyway, there's a ton of stuff there, but mainly for me, it's watching them play and getting the energy of it and the choreography of it, as you said, but the physical, it's so physical. You can learn a lot from the way they move when they play and applying that to drum set. It's almost like watching if Tai Chi were a drumming art form. It's a lot of that. And that's, you can't go wrong with that kind of stuff.
Do you know anything about the tenure of these folks who are in Kodo? Like, do they have a 10-year, is it lifetime? I mean, how do they go in
it's basically as long as they want to be in it, I think. But there's a pretty heavy rotation. Okay. There's not a lot of these folks that are lifers, I don't think. But they'll spend a few years in there for sure, and then go out and do something else. There was during COVID, PASIC in 2020, maybe 2021, they live streamed from the Kodo facility in Japan. And there was a drummer, he was a drum set player, went to Manhattan School of Music, maybe something along those lines, somewhere in the Northeast. I apologize, I don't remember his name or where he went, but he was Japanese heritage, never been to Japan, never heard taiko music before, but then got this opportunity to join Kodo and moved out there and had been out there for several years up to that point, and basically took his jazz knowledge and Western classical music knowledge and applied it to this, applied it to Kodo, and he's doing great. He sounds fantastic. So it can be done, and again, it's there. The transfers there, it's just numerous. So
we have two more categories here.
Yeah,
jazz vibraphone.
The jazz vibraphone. So this has some obvious transfers. Anybody that's playing the drum set in a jazz context, I think you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't get some sort of harmonic and or melodic knowledge to bolster your drum set knowledge. I think it's extremely helpful, and the vibraphone is usually just the way that we do that, because the vibraphone, like the drum set, was invented for jazz. It's 100 years old. Drum set's roughly 120 years old. But yeah, the vibraphone is just a great way to get access to melodic and harmonic aspects of this music from a drummer's perspective. You hold the mallets the exact same way you hold drumsticks. There's so many transfers from the technique. Honestly, playing vibraphone is not really all that hard to get a good sound out of. You don't have to spend weeks and months and years developing your sound on the vibraphone necessarily to get started. It's not like picking up an oboe and trying to make a sound out of a double reed. It's pretty straightforward. There's a pedal involved, and it gets complicated, and there's dampening techniques and all that. But past that, though, just to be able to get on a keyboard is a good experience for anybody. I've had to play vibraphone many, many times over the years in jazz contexts and in other different styles of music, and it's always been helpful to be able to have an outlet to get out some of the chordal things and write music on, or something like that. That's an actual percussion instrument, not necessarily a piano, because I suck at piano. So I don't like hearing myself play piano. So I don't like hearing myself play vibraphone either, to be honest. But I at least enjoy the fact that it feels like a percussion instrument, and I don't feel like I've gone to this other world to do that stuff. I can take what I know and apply it to the vibraphone pretty easily and get to the harmonic language of it. It's also a great way to learn tunes. No better way to learn a tune if you're trying to learn standards. If you're one of those young drummers out there trying to learn tunes, it's a good idea to pick up a real book and just start going through, picking out chords, picking out melodies. If it just like we were talking about earlier, it's one thing to listen to the music, to read the music, to see the music being played. It's another thing to learn the music from the inside out. If you're learning those melodies and you're learning what the notes are of it and the chords of it, you're going to be that much more empathetic to the other musicians around you on the bandstand. But you're also going to know that tune forever. All the tunes that I've learned on the vibraphone, I know those tunes better than any other tunes I know. Because I know how to play them, or at least I did at some point, went through and learned how to play them on the instrument. So it's a great way to deal with that. Plus, there's just tons of great jazz vibraphonists out there that are doing wonderful things, and they're part of our percussion world. So support them, check them out. There's some amazing players going on the vibraphone. The vibraphone's having a little bit of a renaissance, I feel like, in the last few years. With great players like Warren Wolf and Stefan Harris. Jason Marsalis is another one that's come into the vibraphone fairly recently. He plays his butt off. But all the old guys too, going back, and Mike Manieri is another one of my favorites from Steps Ahead. Fantastic. Steve Nelson, local guy from Pittsburgh, played with Dave Holland all those years. Dave Samuels, Dave Friedman, got a chance to hang with David Samuels once when he came up to Slippy Rock as a guest artist, and that was a lot of fun. Found out he was the drummer in between Ruth Underwood and Ed Mann in Frank Zappa's groups. You know, Frank Zappa had a lot of drummers. I'm a huge Frank Zappa fan, but he had two percussionists in his entire career that lasted longer than a year or whatever. And yeah, Dave Samuels was one of those guys. He was played with Zappa for a couple of months in between when Ruth Underwood left and when Ed Mann took over. I thought that was fascinating. We talked about Frank Zappa for a lot while he was here. It was really, really cool. So, but amazing vibraphonist and marimbas percussionist. He had a group with Dave Friedman called Devil Image, which was a big group in the percussion world. They played PASIC many, many times over the years, but they set up a vibraphone and a marimba, a piece, and it looks like a double image or like a mirror. And while one of them's playing marimba, the other one's playing vibraphone, playing jazz types of tunes. They both are incredible improvisers. Go check out that music. It's really fascinating. Not to mention guys like Terry Gibbs and Red Norvo and Cal Jader and Milt Jackson and Lionel Hampton. You know, like the lineage of great vibraphone players is deep and is rich. And like I said, it's going through a little bit of a renaissance lately. And if you've never seen Warren Wolf play the vibraphone, please do yourself a favor and check that dude out, because he is so bad. He is so bad. I am always inspired when I watch that guy play. I hope I get a chance to play with him at some point, because he's going to kick my butt all over the place. I love it every minute.
We were in the Maryland All-State Jazz Band together our senior year.
Really? That's awesome, man.
So
I'm learning all kinds of stuff about you today.
Yeah, Warren won the drum set chair and the vibe chair, so he had to pick one.
Because of course he did.
And when you're talking about learning music from the inside out, like I was learning stuff from books and, you know, dabbling. He went over to the piano and played along the giant steps like perfectly. I was like, okay, this is what it means to be the guy who's going to become who we became. You know,
on another level,
deep
man.
into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Humbling and inspiring to be the same age as that guy. And
Yeah,
he was
right.
10 years ahead of me for sure on the instrument.
He's probably just lucky to know you, Mike.
Yeah, right. All right, let's wrap this thing up. Now you're insulting me. No. Thanks for coming on, Dave.
He's into you, man. I know he is. He's checking this thing out.
Tell me about marching and rudimental drumming and why we need to study that.
Well, this is an obvious one. It's probably the most obvious one, and it's one that probably, I can't say most, but many of the drum set players around have experienced rudiments to some extent, right? Maybe not been involved in a DCI corps or marched in their marching band in high school or anything like that, but we all have been exposed to rudiments, and it's something I unfortunately kind of came to very, very late, and I am really bad at rudimental drumming, but I do have a very strong appreciation for it, and as I get older, I think I'm enjoying working on that stuff more, realizing its importance for me, especially when drum set related kinds of things. But yeah, for me though, the reason why I put this in is there's the American tradition of rudimental drumming that goes back to ancient drumming and Revolutionary War and Civil War era rope drumming kinds of things, which I love, and I think that's fantastic. DCI, WGI, all the drum corps activities and the marching arts in this country. It's an incredible lineage that we have going on here, and that's amazing. I love that stuff. However, there are several other types of rudimental drumming that I love just as much as those being like Scottish pipe band drumming, French rudimental drumming, which I didn't really learn about until fairly recently, and then Swiss or Basel drumming, which is the most wacky marching rudimental drumming you've ever heard in your life. And if you've never heard these three styles of rudimental drumming, I would encourage everybody to go out and check it out. We have some remnants in our American rudiments, PAS rudiments, however you want to characterize them, from those different styles. They originated maybe in Switzerland, or they maybe originated in Scotland, or they maybe originated in France, but they've kind of been mutated over the years and codified into what we now have as our rudiments. But the traditions of these other branches that I just mentioned, they're equally valid. They're equally interesting and deep. There's entire histories of that stuff, and there's great players that play in those styles. But in particular, I'm just interested in trying to, I hear this music, and I'm just curious about it. It just fascinates me to hear Basel drummers play in Fosnacht, which is their carnival season marching groups, and they wear these crazy paper mache helmets, hats that look pretty goofy to us, and they play these huge rope drums, but the music sounds like if Elvin Jones were in a marching band. It sounds a little bit like that. The time is stretched and pulled in a way. In the way they phrase their stuff, there's a lot of quintuplets inside of Swiss Basel drumming. It just fascinates me. And you hear them marching along and playing with the fifes. It's crazy to listen to, and super inspiring. And I would have never known about any of this had it not been for Percussive Art Society conventions and that kind of stuff. I have always enjoyed seeing those kinds of clinics and concerts when they come around at PAS, because I learn something new every time I hear it. Learning Swiss rudiments and learning Scottish rudiments and learning French rudiments it's been really fun, and a great way to supplement my rudimental knowledge, which again, like all this stuff, is very small, but admittedly, but this is a different way of approaching the same thing, and I'm always for that. I'm always into that.
French rudimental drumming I know nothing about, so that's a deep dive for me.
Yeah, there's all kinds of that stuff, and a lot of it stuff came from my love of Jacques Delaclouse's drumming, and a lot of, well, if you played a Delaclouse piece, you've played some French rudimental types of rudiments. But the Tompkins solos are the newest thing that I say new. They've been around for a decade. But they are French rudimental drumming, American and French rudimental drumming combined into these really hip little solos. I would encourage everybody to check those out if you want to stretch your playing a bit. Concert snare drum and rudimental snare drum technique, these things will mess with you a little bit. They're a lot of fun, and they're really hard. So check them out.
Man, thanks for we went long this episode, but it was
Yeah,
there's a lot to dig into.
I like to talk.
The last question I have to ask you, and it has nothing to do with any of this, but it's just tradition. What was your first snare drum?
My first snare drum. That first kit that my parents bought for me came with several different snare drums. I think one of them was a Leedy. They were all 5-inch deep snare drums. I'm pretty sure one of them was a Leedy, and I think I don't even know what the other couple were. I quickly bought a Pearl export kit, and it came with that steel 6.5-inch deep snare drum. This sounded awful, but yeah, that was the first one I actually purchased with my own money. But the first one I think I had was probably a Leedy.
Not bad.
Yeah.
To piggyback, what is your go-to snare drum for gigs around town?
Well, I could actually show it to you. There's a couple of them. I got one right here. I don't use this one too much on gigs, but this is one of our babies. This is a Lang Gladstone drum.
Oh, wow. That's special.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I have a calfskin head on it. This was originally set up for a concert drum. It had gut snares on the bottom. I took those off and then turned it into a jazz drum. But this is a beautiful instrument. This is the shell was done by a guy in Canada named Pete Stanbridge.
Oh, yeah.
Drums.
Yep.
He does segmented shells. You can see blocks. This is that wood. I don't know if you remember ProMark collaborated with Pete Stanbridge to create their, I want to say 50th snare drum, 50th anniversary snare drum.
I do remember that.
It was made from this ancient quarry wood that they dug out of a peat bog in New Zealand.
Of course.
Literally over 10,000 years old. They carbon dated it, and he bought one of those logs and produced all those ProMark drums out of it. I couldn't afford the ProMark drum, and they ran out of them before I could even get one. But I had him he had enough of these tiles that he made me this drum. And
amazing.
This is one of my favorite drums of all time. It's so cool. And I've always been a fan of the Gladstone drums. Just can't afford one of the actual Gladstone drums.
Yes, we can.
But my go-to, excuse me for a second. This is one of my newer drums, but it's one of the new Pearl drums. It's a solid shell.
Oh.
Walnut drum.
Walnut.
The inlay.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so this is my go-to drum for most of the gigs I play around town. I've got, don't tell my wife, but I think I have like 14 snare drums now.
You're just a beginner.
Right? I'm talking to you, yeah, forget about it. But yeah, that's the one I use most of the time.
Nice solid shell with maple re-rings. It look like.
Yeah, super versatile, and yeah, I could tune it up, tune it down. Does everything I need it to do. Yeah,
amazing.
It's a pretty simple drum too. There's nothing fancy about it.
Well, man, thank you so much for the lesson. We all have a lot to dig into here.
Like the longest episode ever. I'm so sorry, man. I could just talk for days and days and days. That's
I need to find that.
Actually, at college is just talk.
You're a good lecturer.
That's what they earned your. I can talk, man. Especially
I need to find that Santana book though. That was the
yeah. So I'll show it to you here real quick. It's sitting right on my bookshelf. It's called the Salsa Guidebook.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Rebecca Molion Santana. Yeah, there's even like piano montunos, bass tumbaos. Like I played through everything on here. Like sat behind the piano, figured out the tumbaos, and yeah, it's all super helpful.
Amazing.
Fairly thick book, but it's great. Check it out.
Who's the publisher?
It's Share Music, SHER.
All right, that is it for this week's episode. Hope you got something out of that. There's a lot of music to listen to and check out, and it's a lifelong study. Again, thank you for listening. Please head over to iTunes or Spotify, give us a 5-star rating, write a review in the text area. We've been kind of slow getting reviews, so if you haven't done one yet, I would be forever thankful if you could write us a review. That does help the show rank higher when people search for drums and percussion and drummers in their different podcast apps. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.